So, welcome to Jumbo Eyes and welcome to our lecture series called Daily News in Shorts. In this lecture series, we cover a particular day's current affairs in a very short span of time so that you are left with your entire day covering other parts of your UPSC syllabus. You don't have to spend your entire day just covering current affairs. This lecture series will sort that out within 30 minutes. Now, just watching this lecture would be job half done because just after watching it, you need to revise it as well. Revision helps in consolidating these current affairs in your memory. Otherwise, you'll quickly forget them. Now, you can revise these current affairs from our notes, and these notes are shared on our Telegram platform. Now, where can you find our Telegram channel? Well, just below this video in the comment section, you'll find a link. You just have to click on that link. It'll take you to our Telegram channel, and from there, you can download the notes for this lecture. All right, without further delay, let's start today's discussion. But first, let's take a look at the topics we shall cover in today's lecture. Okay, so let's take a look at the list of topics. Number one topic is new income tax bill. Along with this budget, the finance minister introduced a new income tax bill which will replace the Income Tax Act of 1961. Okay, now this is a big reform because it is going to simplify and make income tax easier for taxpayers. So we'll talk about this bill. Then an article in the Indian Express came about which talked about sovereign green bonds and why not many investors are buying Indian sovereign green bonds. So what are green bonds? What are sovereign green bonds? And what are the problems with Indian bonds? Why are not many investors excited about Indian sovereign bonds? Okay, or sovereign green bonds. We'll talk about this. Then another scheme that was launched in this year's budget was PM Dhan Dhanya Krishi Yojana. As the name suggests, it aims to basically help farmers in different parts of our country. So we'll talk about this scheme. And in the end, we'll talk about the issue of marital rape. Because recently, Chhattisgarh High Court gave a ruling. And that ruling was very significant as far as the issue of marital rape is concerned. So we'll talk about Indian law and marital rape. Okay, so these are the four topics that we'll focus our attention on. Let's try to give our 100% and let's start today's discussion. So, topic number one is new income tax bill. So the government has introduced new income tax bill 2025, and the main purpose of introducing this new bill, which will replace the earlier Income Tax Act, is simplifying tax law. And if tax laws are simplified, then more and more people would pay taxes. Okay, so compliance would become easier and ensuring a streamlined taxation regime. So basically, government wants to make income tax payment easier, convenient for all the taxpayers. While the overall tax structure would remain same. Okay, this new bill will not bring a new tax structure. The overall income tax structure would remain same, but it is just going to simplify the previous law. Okay, now if this bill is passed in the parliament, in Lok Sabha particularly, then this bill will become an act of parliament. Okay, will be a law, and this law will come into force from April 1st, 2026. Now, what are the key features of this new bill? What all it is going to replace from the previous Income Tax Act? So, key features. Now, first of all, it will introduce the tax year concept. We have talked about tax year concept in the previous current affairs lecture, but tax year concept is basically that if you'll earn income in this year, you'll have to pay income tax on this income within this year only. Earlier, the thing was that you would pay income tax on the income earned in the previous year. Okay, but with this tax year concept, the income will be taxed in the same year it is earned. Then, various provisions are being simplified. The bill will reduce various provisions, provisos, cross-referencing, because certain things were scattered in different sections of the act. So if you want to understand one thing, you had to refer to these different scattered things also. Now, what the government is doing is, with this new bill, all the similar things are going to be placed in one schedule. Okay, so cross-referencing would be reduced, and it would reduce complexity. Then, the definition of income has also been expanded. Look, income was defined earlier in the Income Tax Act, and it also defined incomes from assets. Okay, assets like land, gold, shares, right? All these were classified as assets which were taxable under the Income Tax Act. But this assets definition did not include digital assets like cryptocurrencies and NFTs. The new definition of the income includes these virtual digital assets and brings them in the category of taxable assets. Okay, so the definition of income has been expanded. And this was due basically because people are earning money from these virtual digital assets. So it was high time that the government update its definition and come up to speed with the current circumstances. Then it removed various redundant provisions. Okay, it will remove and bring more clarity in existing provisions. Plus, if you pay income tax, okay, and there is a dispute between you and income tax authorities, then the dispute resolution mechanism also required some reforms. Through this income tax bill, government is bringing these reforms also, so that dispute resolution process becomes easier and more convenient for the taxpayers. Now, what would be the benefits of this new bill? Well, it will improve tax compliance because now it would become easier to pay taxes. More and more people would pay taxes. So, tax compliance would improve, tax filing would be streamlined. It is in sync with current circumstances because digital assets are also included in the category of taxable assets. Plus, when the law is complicated, okay, when the law is complicated, it basically gives discretion in the hands of implementing authorities. So, those who are implementing that law, well, because the law is complicated and it's difficult for normal people to understand that law, the people who are implementing that law, government authorities, have basically the discretion to harass people. But if the law becomes simple, that each and every person understands it, layman can understand it, then it would become very difficult for authorities to harass you because now you too understand the law. Now, simplification of taxation law would also reduce harassment from taxation authorities. Okay, so this is a good thing basically. All right, so many experts are basically hailing this new tax law. Okay, though some experts are saying that more could have been done, but still they are happy with what is being done. All right, okay. Now let's move on to our next news item, which is sovereign green bonds. Okay. Now, first of all, you need to know what are bonds. So, bonds are basically borrowing instruments. So, whenever you have to borrow anything, okay, or your company wants to borrow some money, okay, you issue these pieces of paper called bonds. These pieces of papers are proof that you have borrowed money, okay, and you will pay back on time. Clear? So bonds are nothing but borrowing instruments that are issued by borrowers. Clear? Now the interest rate on these borrowings are known as yield of a bond. Just remember this for simplicity. Now, if the bond is issued by a government authority, not a private authority, but a government authority, it is known as a sovereign bond. And if the money that is borrowed is used towards green projects, sustainable projects, okay, environment projects, then it is called green bonds. So, sovereign green bonds are basically borrowing instruments whose proceeds go towards green projects and they are issued by the government. So, this is what a sovereign green bond is. Simple. Now, like several emerging markets, India also turned to sovereign green bonds to help fund its transition to a low carbon economy because India also wants to transition to low carbon economy, reduce its greenhouse gas emissions. But for that transition, India needs money. So what did India do? India is funding that transition through its budget, but still that budget is not adequate. So Indian government is issuing sovereign green bonds so that it can borrow money for green projects. Okay, but there are not many buyers of these bonds. Okay, there are not many people or investors who are investing in these bonds. Investor demand for these bonds remains weak. Okay, while green bonds help governments raise capital for clean energy and infrastructure, India's issues have struggled to secure a meaningful greenium or green premium. Okay, now we'll talk about this word greenium. Just have some patience for a minute or two. Okay. Now, let's talk more about green bonds. Okay. So now you have understood these are debt instruments, borrowing instruments. Okay. They are issued by governments, corporations, multilateral banks to raise funds for green investments. Okay. Now, if governments are issuing these bonds, then the word sovereign is added. Okay. Now, the thing is that normal bonds, okay, normal bonds have an interest rate which we call yield. Okay. Green bonds also have an interest rate which is green bond yield. Okay. Now the thing is that green bonds offer lower interest rate than normal bonds. Okay. The reason for that is that government who wants to borrow money doesn't want to pay that much interest on these borrowings. Okay. That is why green bonds offer less interest rate. The lower the interest rate, the better it is for the government to issue green bonds. That means the lower the yield on green bonds, the better it is for the government to issue green bonds, right? Because it makes them borrow at very low cost and fund green projects. Clear? Now, the difference between yield of conventional bond and yield of green bond is known as the green premium or greenium. So, green premium is basically the benefit that the issuer of these bonds, in this case, the government, has by borrowing through these green bonds. Had they borrowed money through conventional bonds, they would have to pay higher yield. But now they are borrowing money through green bonds, they are paying less yield. So this difference is their premium, also known as greenium. Okay. So it is the difference between yields on conventional bonds and green bonds, since green bonds offer lower yields. Okay. Now you might be thinking, why are investors ready to invest in these bonds if these bonds are offering low yield? We'll talk about that. Okay. Sovereign green bonds are those that are issued by sovereign entities. We have covered that. Now, what are the benefits of issuing sovereign green bonds? Well, first of all, like I've mentioned, that the yield on sovereign green bonds is lower. So, green bonds are a way for the government to borrow money at low cost and fund that or channelize that money towards green investments. Right? So, the biggest benefit is for the borrower, low cost of funds for green investment. Okay. A higher greenium. Greenium means difference between normal bond yield and green bond yield. So if the difference is more, that means yield on green bonds is very low. Allows issuers of these bonds or borrowers to raise funds at lower cost, making green investments more attractive. Then, why do investors go for the bonds that offer low yield? Well, investors in green bonds often seek stable long-term returns and may also have internal or external mandates. Okay, so maybe their governments have made it compulsory for them to invest some amount of their investments in green projects. Okay, so they do that by buying green bonds. Clear? So that is why investors invest in green bonds. But Indian green bonds are not that popular. Why? First of all, for Indian government, it is a very bad situation because the greenium on Indian bonds is low. That means that the yield on conventional bonds and the yield on green bonds is not that different. That is what we mean by low greenium. Had the greenium been high, then the yields on green bonds would have been even lower because greenium is difference. So because Indian green bonds don't offer that much greenium, that is why government is also reluctant from borrowing through these instruments. Okay, makes sense? Because the greenium is low. That means the difference between conventional yield and green bond yield is low. Okay, so the government thinks that I might as well borrow from normal bond because there is not much difference. Clear? Plus, the thing is that there is a big liquidity challenge with respect to Indian green bonds. Now, what do we mean by liquidity challenge? Look, foreign investors invest in green bonds, but green bonds have a maturity period. So, on every bond, there is written a thing called time period. Let's suppose it's 5 years. That means if you have given money for 5 years, you'll get your money back after 5 years. So, your money is locked for 5 years. Yes, you will receive some yield, but after 5 years. But what if an investor needs money now, after 1 or 2 years? So that investor can sell this bond to a third party. Okay. Now, by doing that, he can easily convert his piece of paper bond to cash, right? This is what is known as liquidity. The problem is that Indian green bonds are not that saleable in the market, in the bond market. Nobody readily buys Indian green bonds, and that is why investors' money remains locked in these bonds. Okay, this is a big challenge. Plus, investors who are investing in green bonds also want to know where their money is going. So if government has borrowed money from them through these green bonds, they want to know where this money is being used. Okay, so they require reporting transparency, that the government reports to them transparently where this money is being used. Is this money being used for green projects, or the government is hoodwinking them, or the government is committing a fraud? Okay, so there should be proper reporting transparency, because if there is poor reporting transparency, it basically destroys investor confidence. Okay, and they are reluctant to buy your bonds. Clear? Now, what is the way forward? How can we improve the attractiveness of Indian bonds? Well, a recommendation was given by World Bank. World Bank says that instead of issuing green bonds, issue sustainability bonds. Okay. Now, sustainability bonds are also similar to green bonds, but the thing is that sustainability bonds can give money to green projects, can also give money to social projects like poverty reduction and all that. So when you combine green projects and social projects in one bond, it is called sustainability bond. Because poor and developing countries require social expenditure as well. Okay, in social security. Clear? Apart from environment, they also want to spend on removing poverty and whatnot. So they should combine these two things into one bond called sustainability bonds. If your money is being diverted towards social projects, poverty reduction and all, then investors from these rich countries would be willing to invest in your sustainability bonds. Okay. And the other thing that you can do is improve transparency reporting so as to instill investor confidence so that more and more investors buy your green bonds. This is the way forward suggested by World Bank to make Indian green bonds or sustainability bonds more attractive. Clear? All right. Now let's move forward to third topic, which is PM Dhan Dhanya Krishi Yojana. So Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, while presenting Union budget, announced the launch of Prime Minister Dhan Dhanya Krishi Yojana. The Yojana is inspired by the success of Aspirational Districts Program 2018. So government achieved a lot through this program, Aspirational Districts Program, and the government has basically designed a new scheme on the same lines of Aspirational Districts Program to help farmers. Clear? Now what all is there in this new Yojana? So it will cover 100 districts, and those 100 districts would be the ones where farmers face the biggest challenges. Okay. The scheme aims to generate opportunities in rural areas so that migration is an option and not a necessity. We see a lot of rural urban migration. Many rural people or people from rural areas migrate to urban areas. And why do they do it? Because of lack of opportunities in the rural areas. So this scheme will address that. Okay. Through this scheme, through agriculture, enough opportunities in rural areas would be created. Then people who want to migrate to urban areas can migrate it, but they won't be forced to migrate to urban areas. So migration would be an option, not a necessity. Now, how would these 100 districts will be chosen? First of all, government will look at three criterias. One, areas where agricultural productivity is low, areas where crop intensity is very low, an area where credit, farm credit, agricultural credit is not adequately provided. Okay. If there is a district where all these three things are showcasing poor performance, then that district will be chosen for PMDKY. Okay. What are the key objectives outlined by Finance Minister for this scheme? Enhancing agricultural productivity, adopting crop diversification and sustainable agriculture, augmenting post-harvest storage. Okay. Most of the times the crop harvested by farmers gets spoiled because there are not many cold storage facilities or crop preservation facilities. So it will address that issue, irrigation facilities, and availability of long-term and short-term credit. Now, I mentioned aspirational districts program, okay, in the beginning of the discussion with respect to this Dhan Dhanya Krishi Yojana. So let's talk about aspirational districts program. So you know that it was launched in 2018, and what was the purpose? The program aimed to quickly and effectively transform 112 backward districts of India, 112 of the most underdeveloped districts across India, based on 3 C's. Okay, what are these 3 C's? So basically, aspirational district program has 3 C's. Number one, convergence. So all central and state schemes would be converged. Okay, there would be one decision making authority with respect to all these schemes. Then collaboration between center and state officers. Then competition among districts, because every year these 112 districts would be ranked based on their based on the improvement of their performance. Okay, the ranking would be based on 49 key performance indicators under 5 broad socioeconomic themes: health and nutrition, education, agriculture, water resources, financial inclusion, skill development, and infrastructure. Okay, very simple. All right, and now we come to the last news item of the day, which is Indian law and marital rape. Okay, now all crimes were handled by one law in India, which was known as, most of the crimes, Indian Penal Code. Okay. Now, Section 395 of Indian Penal Code basically criminalizes rape. But in Section 395, okay, it is an exception is given. If there is a charge of rape, okay, and if that woman who is leveling the charge of rape is married to you, okay, then that won't be considered a rape. So non-consensual sex won't be categorized as rape if the couple is married. Okay, so basically rape is non-consensual sex, but if both the man and woman are married, then that won't be categorized as rape. So this category of marital rape was not recognized by Indian law. Okay, it was not recognized because the exception to the criminalization of rape was that if you are married, then it won't be considered as rape. Okay, but there was this another section called Section 377, which was basically used to criminalize homosexuality. Okay, but the wording of Section 377 was that if there is unnatural sex, okay, now homosexuality was considered unnatural through this provision. Okay, but it was said, the wording of 377 was, if there is unnatural sex with man, woman, or any type of unnatural and violent sex, or the word violent wasn't mentioned, but if there is unnatural sex, okay, then you can be punished under Section 377. Now, mostly it was used to criminalize homosexuality, but females who were aggrieved by their husbands, who had to go for non-consensual sex from their husbands, who complained of marital rape, used this provision. They used to say that whatever he was doing, that was unnatural. He was beating, or he was doing domestic violence along with sexual violence, which is not natural. Okay, so Section 395 didn't consider it rape. But all these women who complained of marital rape and violence and sexual violence, they used to go to the courts under Section 377. Because under Section 377, there is no exception of being married. Section 377 will penalize you whether you are married or not. Okay? Now, this was the situation. But what has happened? The Chhattisgarh High Court in a key ruling said that the marital rape immunity, the immunity of marriage in Section 395, also extends to 377. Recently, there was a person who was accused of committing sexual violence on his wife, so much so that his wife died. Now, a lower court convicted him of Section 377 and murder also. Okay. Now, he filed an appeal with Chhattisgarh High Court, and Chhattisgarh High Court said that the exception of marriage, which applies to 395, also applies to 377. Okay. So because that woman was his wife, so any sexual violence or unnatural violence won't be considered as violence because they are married together. Okay. So this person won't be punished, and he was acquitted. Now there was a huge uproar. Okay. Many people criticized this judgment, but that was the case. Clear? So as far as Indian law is concerned, well, Section 375, well, it criminalizes rape, but sexual intercourse or sexual acts by a man with his own wife is not criminalized. Then what did these aggrieved females, married females, had an option? Well, they had the option of Section 377, which outlaws carnal intercourse against the order of nature with any man, woman, or animal. Against the order of nature. And they used to say that sexual violence is against the order of the nature, and that is why they used to take their husbands to court under this provision. Okay, so IPC section 377 is often the only legal recourse for married women in cases of non-consensual sex in marriage. But now Chhattisgarh High Court has taken away this only recourse also. Okay, it says that the exception provided in 375 also applies to 377. Okay, now in 2023, IPC was replaced by Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita. So most of the provisions of IPC were basically taken into this new law called Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, and Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita replaced IPC. Okay, all the old cases that were going on before 2023, well, on them IPC will be applied, but all the new cases would have Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita applied to them. Okay, so this was basically, the Chhattisgarh case was basically the old case. That is why the court was listening to arguments with respect to IPC. Now, the problem is that in Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, again, the exception to marital rape is provided. Okay, the exception to marriage is provided, but Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita also does one more thing. It has completely omitted section 377. There is no matching provision related to section 377. Okay, so it has included section 375 with the different section name. Okay, provides the same exception of marriage, but as far as section 377 is concerned, which was the only recourse left to females, is also not provided for in the new law. Okay, IPC section 377 has been omitted in Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita. Now, numerous experts have argued that this is an issue as the deletion of the law leaves men and LGBTQ individuals without meaningful protection against sexual offences. So, men against whom sexual offences are committed, or LGBTQ community people against whom sexual offences were committed, they used to go to court under section 377 to punish the perpetrator. But now that this is not available in the new law, this will be a problem. In fact, in 2024, advocate Gantavya Gulati filed a PIL in Delhi High Court seeking revival of section 377. Okay, but the thing is, Delhi High Court is still looking into the matter. But in October 2024, Supreme Court was listening to a similar PIL, but Supreme Court dismissed that PIL. So most probably even Delhi High Court will dismiss it, because the Supreme Court has dismissed a similar PIL, and the argument given by Supreme Court was that the act of declaring a particular thing as crime is the job of the parliament, not judiciary. Parliament makes laws. How can we make law? So this is outside our domain, and that is why we are dismissing this plea. So this is the current situation you need to know about. All right. And with that, we conclude today's session. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. And please do not forget to revise this lecture. Revision is very important because you need to remember these current affairs till your examination. That's why it's important. Okay. On that note, I'll be signing off. Thank you so much, everyone.